No trumpet, no screaming, only the muffled sound of breathing, the creaking of armor, and the silence before impact. On the battlefield, there were orders that were not spoken out loud. They were obeyed without being listened to, engraved not on papyri, but in the flesh, in the memory, in the blood of those who came back alive. These were orders that the Senate would never accept. Invisible laws that went from veteran to novice with a look, with a gesture, with a body lying on the ground. Rome was famous for its tactics, its discipline, its genius generals. But what sustained the legion was not in the history books. He was on the margins of madness, where reason no longer rules and instinct reigns. Before each march, there was an unspoken pact. Inside, either you obey what has not been written or dies trying to follow what's in the textbooks. And now you will know the 7 secret orders of the Legion that were never written. But if you decide to continue, know, once you hear, them there is no way to forget. The manuals told how to wield the gladius, how to march in formation, how to resist the cold. But what to do when the enemy didn't come in front of him, but the shadows? When the danger did not wear armor, but hid itself in one's own tent mates? Rome never wrote about it, because to admit these occult orders would be to admit that the legion machine was not perfect. On paper, everything worked. But in the swamps of Germania, in the jungles of Britain, in the deserts of Africa, the rules changed. It was there that the secret orders were born, forged in fear, superstition, survival, rules that could not be said, only felt, only obeyed. The generals returned to Rome with medals, but the soldiers, they returned with silences, and each silence carried an unspoken commandment, because in the darkest nights, the only thing that saved a legion, it was what the books did not teach. And now, you're going to dig up those orders with us. But understand, the deeper we dig, the more dangerous the truth becomes. But before continuing this excavation, does the following. If this dark, tense, and invisible atmosphere has already held you here, leave the like now, not out of vanity, but because it shows that you are one of the few who see what others ignore. Subscribe to the channel, because what comes next is not in the books. It is buried in the mud of history, waiting for someone like you to dig it up. And it activates the bell, because here, with each video, we reveal what Rome has tried to hide for centuries. Give the like, sign up, and we will go to the end of this march together. Order number 1, never trust those who have not bled with you. You can march alongside a man for days. You can share bread, water, and even a childhood story, but as long as he hasn't bled with you, he's just a face. An uncertainty, a potential threat, because true brotherhood in the Legion was not born in the camps. He was born on the verge of death. This order was silent, but everyone knew it. Trust did not come with the oath to the Emperor. It was sealed only when 2 souls crossed the Valley of Shadow together and back. It didn't matter the rank, the coat of arms, or the speech. It mattered the moment you saw that man bleed and still keep fighting. Only then did he become a brother. That was why veterans looked suspiciously at clean armored recruits, because armor shining through the mud of war was like a lie screaming in the dark, and the lie in the Legion, it cost lives. If a man has never cried blood by his side, he cannot be trusted. And this truth, though never spoken aloud, echoed like a sentence, one of the cruelest in Rome. Order number 2. If you are going to be a coward, let no one see it. Everyone was afraid. It was impossible not to feel it. But in the Legion, fear had to be swallowed like poison, fast, dry, and without a trace. It was not forbidden to be afraid. The forbidden thing was to demonstrate it, because all it took was a trembling look, an out-of-rhythm breathing, a hesitation before the attack, for the confidence of the entire row to crumble. Nobody taught this order. It was learned by screaming, not those that came out of the mouth, but those that were choked in the chest. A man could tremble, but never before the centurion's eyes. If it were to falter, let it be in the shadows, hidden among the cloaks, where no one could see. Cowardice was seen as a disease, contagious. A single collapsing soldier could cause the entire line to collapse, and for this reason, the veterans looked coldly at those who cried loudly, who wavered before the shield, who trembled before wielding the sword. These men they did not return, and if they returned, they were no longer heard. The second order was brutal. Die fighting or die silently, but never die on your knees before the eyes of the legion. Order number 3. The wind can be the enemy. In Germania, the enemy was rarely seen. He came with the cold, with the mist, with the creaking of the trees and the swaying of the leaves. And the most experienced soldiers knew the wind was a messenger. When the smell of the earth changed, when the air blew differently, there was more than climate in that invisible stream. There was death. The manuals taught how to listen to the centurion, but the true survivor learned to listen to what had no voice. The wind cutting behind the hill, the sudden silence of the forest, the absence of birds. These were the alerts that saved a row. The enemy was not announced by horns, but by the shiver that went up his spine before the attack. And at that time, the one who blindly obeyed the marching orders without paying attention to the smell of the forest, to the hot breath that moved between the canopies, was the first to fall. The third order did not come with explanations. If the wind changes, stop or prepare to die. That was why many said that the Legion won more by instinct than by strategy, because the air spoke, and only the living knew that. Order number 4. Bury yours always. In the rush of war, the dead became weight. They were left in the way, devoured by wolves or rotting in the sun. But among veterans, this was unacceptable. There was a secret order, one that no one dared to break. Bury yours always. It was not just a matter of honor. It was fear, an ancient, almost sacred fear. It was believed that the soldier who died and was not buried would return, not in body, but in a curse, a wandering spirit that would roam the countryside, cursing those who abandoned it, and that, in Rome, was worse than death itself. That is why, even in the bloodiest retreats, even under a shower of arrows, there were men who dug with their hands, who wrapped their brothers in torn cloaks, who murmured words to the gods even with a choked voice. Because they knew, leave a companion for the vultures. It was to call perdition to oneself. This order was passed in whispers, in stories, told at the campfires. Nobody laughed at her, because everyone had seen or felt the weight of an unburied spirit. And when the war was silent, it was this silence that haunted him the most. Order number 5. When the torch falls, stand still. Not all orders came out loud. Some came with a minimal, almost imperceptible gesture, but there was one in particular that everyone was afraid to ignore. If a torch fell in the dark, stand still. It seemed like superstition, but it was pure survival. In nocturnal ambushes, the slightest noise betrayed positions. A broken stick, a panting breath, or the sound of hasty footsteps. When someone dropped a torch, it was no accident. It was code. It was a sign that there was something lurking. The veterans froze. They did not move. They didn't even look. They knew that the movement was an arrow, and the arrow did not expect questions. That was why the legions looked like living statues in the night, trained to obey the non-verbal. The dropping of the torch was the mute cry of survival, and whoever moved, it was the first to be pierced. This type of order did not enter the military reports. He did not appear in the speeches of the Senate. but it was engraved in the mind of every soldier who wanted to live until the next dawn. And it was as simple as this. Did the torch fall? Stay still. Do not breathe. Don't think. Wait. Who understands this silence survives. Order number 6. Never pray loudly before battle. In the hours leading up to the battle, some closed their eyes. Others played hidden amulets. But no one prayed aloud. This was one of the most ingrained and most feared commands. Never pray out loud before the blood starts flowing. The legionaries believed that the gods had sensitive and cruel ears. An outcry too loud was seen as despair, like weakness, and worse, as a request that exposed the entire legion to divine fury. Because when a soldier shouted to the heavens, he seemed to say, "We are on the verge of death, interfere." And often they interfered, but not in the expected way. The older ranks had whispered stories of legions that were decimated after desperate prayers, men who cried out to Mars and were the first to fall. That is why prayer was done with the eyes, with his heart beating firmly, at most with a murmur between clenched teeth. This order was more than superstition, it was protection, because the true believer did not cry out, he accepted, and he entered death as one who faces fate in silence. And whoever dared to break this rule, he was silenced before by his own brothers. Order number 7, don't obey if the smell is wrong. It was the most absurd order, and at the same time, the most respected. If the smell is wrong, don't march. It didn't matter if the centurion screamed, if the bell rang, if the formation was already ready, if the wind brought a strange smell, mold, rotting flesh, acid, smoke. The veterans stopped. Smell was the unofficial oracle of the legion, and no one made fun of it. In treacherous forests, swamps, or overly empty villages, the odor in the air said more than the spies. A different smell could indicate hidden bodies, buried traps, enemies waiting a few steps away. And ignore this invisible sign. It was to sign one's own sentence. Experienced soldiers had already learned, death has a smell, and when it is close, even the air changes. The skin shivers, the stomach tightens, instinct screams inside, and who survived long enough? He learned to obey this silent cry. If the smell is wrong, not even the emperor convinces you to continue. This was the last and most brutal of the unrecorded orders, because in the end, it wasn't the manual that saved a life. It was the nose of someone who has felt death too close to rely only on the eyes. These orders were not on parchment, not even in the speeches of senators, nor in the statues of generals. They were in the dry gaze of the veteran who returned mute from battle, in the trembling of the hands that held the helmet for the last time, in the scar that hurt the most when the wind changed. These orders were invisible bones supporting the actual structure of the legion, because Rome was built up with sword and law, but it was held up by codes that no one dared to write. Codes that passed between whispers, gestures, presentiments. They were the dirty, bitter orders, loaded with superstition and truth, more faithful to reality than any imperial decree. In the end, what kept a soldier alive, it wasn't the training, it wasn't the glory, it was the instinct to obey what could not be said. And the scariest thing is this: these orders did not die with Rome. They still live, hidden in other ranks, in other wars, in other souls. Because what is recorded in silence, it is never forgotten. If this content has already made you see Rome from another angle, then he reciprocates. This video is not just information, it is a reconstruction of a forgotten truth. And if this impacted you, leave the like now as a way to say, yes, this type of content needs to exist. Subscribe to the channel, because each story we bring here is not just to entertain, it's to transform your view of the past, and maybe even about the present. The Empire tried to hide these orders, The official story silenced those who knew about them, but now you know, and if you want to continue this journey with us, you are already part of this legion that sees beyond words.